crisis in Ukraine, monitoring the latest from the military conflict, including how faith leaders are trying to help those fleeing the violence. Fight for the unborn. Lawmakers in 2 U.S. states move in opposite directions on abortion. Coronavirus crisis. A U.S. Archbishop is diagnosed with COVID-19. We have the latest. And Helping Hand. How one U.S. priest is responding to the refugee crisis in Ukraine. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Pope Francis says he will consecrate Ukraine and Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The service will take place March 25th in St. Peter's Basilica. Ukraine and Russia are majority Orthodox countries. Both have deep traditions of Marian devotion. The Holy Father is also sending Cardinal Michael Czerny back to the Ukraine border tomorrow. The Jesuit cardinal will also arrive in Slovakia. Last week, he spent time on Ukraine's border with Hungary. Both trips were requested by Pope Francis. Talks between officials from Ukraine and Russia continue today. Both sides are reporting progress, but no agreements have been reached. The dialogue comes as bombings continue throughout the country. Russia has brought a proposal to the United Nations asking that humanitarian corridors are respected and kept safe. Yesterday, the UN Secretary General called for increased security for refugees and urged the parties to reach a prompt agreement on a ceasefire. Meantime, President Joe Biden plans to travel to Europe next week to attend an urgent NATO summit in Belgium. He is trying to keep up the pressure on Russia. Economic sanctions already forced Russia's stock market to shut down and left its credit rating at junk status. Still, the bombs continue to fall in Ukraine. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, not only do the bombs keep falling in Ukraine, but tonight NATO is worried that Russia may choose to use horrific weapons of war.
President Joe Biden signs the Consolidated Appropriations Act, $1.5 trillion to fund the U.S. government. The legislation also includes billions of dollars to help war-torn Ukraine.
We're moving urgently to further augment the support to the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their country.
And that help cannot come soon enough. Russia bombing Kyiv, a 15-story apartment building hit by an airstrike today. People killed, but also dozens rescued. And now this warning from NATO.
We are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons.
Meanwhile, Russia says it's sanctioning President Joe Biden, some members of his cabinet, and even the White House press secretary.
None of us are planning tourist trips to Russia. None of us have bank accounts that we won't be able to access, so we will forge ahead.
Also, the U.S. is warning China and the rest of the world not to help Vladimir Putin financially or militarily.
Every country around the world has a responsibility to stand up, to speak out against Vladimir Putin's war of choice in Ukraine.
The U.S. State Department also says security assistance to Ukraine keeps flowing.
We're providing surface-to-air systems. We're providing anti-tank systems. We're providing anti-armor systems. We're providing small arms. We're providing munitions.
And today, Ukraine's president told Northern European leaders,
We all are the targets of Russia, and everything will go against Europe if Ukraine won't stand. So I would like to ask you to help yourself by helping us.
Separately tonight, the White House says it needs billions of more dollars urgently in emergency funding to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. But some Republican lawmakers say they want a better accounting of how the previous money was spent. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
As the military conflict in Ukraine continues, the country's president is set for a virtual address tomorrow morning to U.S. lawmakers. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the remarks have special significance.
But it is nearly unheard of in modern times that we hear from a leader fighting for his life, fighting for his country's survival, and fighting to preserve the idea of democracy.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says lawmakers will consider a bill later this week revoking Russia's most favored nation trade status, doing away with lower taxes on imported Russian goods. The Kremlin says that it is spending around $9 billion to offset the sanctions. A Ukrainian Catholic bishop is describing how the hardship of military attacks in the city of Kharkiv brought together two of his fellow bishops.
The Bishop of Kharkiv has received, the Ukrainian Catholic bishop has received an Orthodox bishop who lived on the outskirts. His windows were blown out, his apartment building was damaged, so he's living with the Ukrainian Catholic bishop.
Speaking at the National Press Club in D.C. earlier today, Archbishop Boris Gutsiak was joined by Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. Both expressed gratitude for humanitarian support for Ukraine and also pleaded for increased defensive military help. And coming up later in the newscast, how the faithful in Italy are helping refugees fleeing the violence in Ukraine. Coming up, analysis of the Vatican diplomat who was expelled from Nicaragua. The Maryland House has advanced legislation to codify abortion as a right in the state's constitution. Consideration of the bill moves next to the state Senate, that is. If passed, a constitutional right to abortion would go on the Maryland ballot for November's general election. Meanwhile, the state of Idaho is advancing pro-life legislation. Its House has overwhelmingly passed a bill modeled after the Texas heartbeat law to ban abortions after 6 weeks under penalty of civil lawsuits. The measure now moves to Governor Brad Little for his signature. Detroit's Archbishop Alan Vigneron has tested positive for COVID-19. The vaccinated 73-year-old, who is also the vice president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, reports very mild symptoms. Archbishop Vigneron says that he is praying for all affected by the coronavirus. He is also interceding for healthcare workers as they provide services for those in need. For the first time in Germany, the Catholic Diocese of Essen has commissioned 17 women to administer the sacrament of baptism. Canon law does permit a bishop to designate a catechist or other person to confer baptism licitly in the absence of an ordinary minister. And for more on this story, including more about what canon law says about who can perform a baptism, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Guatemalan President Alejandro Giammattei has proclaimed Guatemala the pro-life capital of Latin America. Giammattei promised to protect life from conception to natural death and said that he would fight for families in his nation. He also said March 9th will be a National Day of Life in Guatemala going forward. And joining me now to talk more about this is Alejandro Bermudez, Executive Director of CNA Aussie Group. Alejandro, great to see you. Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit more about Guatemala. How does it compare to other Latin American countries when it comes to protecting life?
Well, some other countries have very pro-life legislation. El Salvador, for example, but definitely Guatemala is an outlier in how evidently and how the authorities, the political authorities, has been so outspoken in terms of defending life, to the point that there was actually last week a ceremony to establish officially Guatemala City as the pro-life capital of the world. Is a little bit of a hyperbole, but pretty much deserved by how the laws are being passed or considered in Guatemala.
Yeah, and another thing I want to talk about, as you know, on the other side, Colombia has become the latest Latin American country to legalize abortion, that is, allowing it up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. Alejandro, what do you think led to this change?
Well, there is a systematic targeting country by country by the international pro-abortion lobby. That's a fact. And obviously, we Catholics have not been sufficiently prepared at least in Argentina, which was the major target, Mexico continues to be a target, and Colombia was the next one. And they found that it was impossible to legalize abortion through the Congress and Senate because it's a pro-life country. So they decided for many years to influence in how the members of the Constitutional Court, what will be the Supreme Court, were chosen. So if you want kind of like the opposite of what has been happening with the Supreme Court in the United States happened in Colombia. And choices have consequences, and that's what happened in Colombia. Awful law that would allow Colombia to abort babies until they are viable, 6 months.
So sad. Another thing I want to talk about on a different note, Bishop Emeritus Gustavo Zanqueta from Argentina, as you know, was found criminally guilty of sexually abusing seminarians. What more can you tell us about that? What more do you know?
Well, it was a really fair investigation. There were testimonies that could sink a ship against him. And the law did the right thing. And it's unfortunate that the canonical process was not completed before that. There was an archbishop in Argentina that was entrusted with that investigation. He completed his canonical investigation, sent it to the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, and we're still expecting the canonical, the church side of the investigation, but the legal side is sending him to jail for the right reasons.
Another thing I want to talk about, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but something else that's making headlines. A Vatican diplomat was recently expelled from Nicaragua. However, the details about his expulsion are rather vague. Do you know any more about it?
Yes, we knew that this was coming, Tracy, because once the nuncio, who performed his duties magnificently well, impeccable conduct as an apostolic nuncio, but once he mentioned political prisoners, so he used the term political prisoners, that was enough for the dictatorship of Ortega. Like every dictator, just they start becoming crazy. So we knew that Ortega was going to come back with some kind of revenge, embarrassing himself, because this is embarrassing. There was no reason to do this as a nation and as a state, which speaks more about what Ortega is right now in his state of mind than where the Vatican is with the performance of its duties in the diplomatic sphere.
Well, Alejandro, so much more we can talk about in Latin America, but we're running out of time. Thank you so much for your time today and speaking with us about all this. We really appreciate it. Up next, one American priest's mission to rescue orphans from the military conflict in Ukraine. Amid the military conflict in Ukraine, some faith leaders in Italy are trying to help. The Apostolic Exarchate for Ukraine's Catholics was founded in 2019 by Pope Francis. It is part of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church under the Holy See. In 2020, it had more than 70,000 members. Joining us now from Rome is Sonya Soutus, director of the Ukrainian Catholic Crisis Media Center. Sonya, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Can you tell us how your group is trying to help people out amid the military conflict that we're seeing in Ukraine?
Thank you, Tracy, for having me here today. And yes, I'm here also talking about the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy for the Byzantine Rite in Italy. And as you can imagine, we have a great number of refugees coming in. We did have quite a large community of faithful here in Italy. The Exarchate was created in October 2020 by Pope Francis. And so we've got quite a large community here. We have about 70 priests and 161 communities in Italy. So we were very, very ready to help. There has been an outpouring from the Italian people, from the Italian hierarchy, from everyday people who have come to all of our communities, to our churches here in Rome, and have donated a huge amount of charitable items. We've actually sent almost 20 trucks just from one church here to the border in order to be able to help the refugees. And as you may know, the refugees are welcome in Europe, throughout Europe, and Italy is no different. And so many of our churches, practically all of them, are working now as centers to be able to help the refugees find a place to stay, be able to understand what the next steps are in their lives. We're working with psychological centers to be able to help the refugees cope with the terrible trauma that they've all gone through.
Yeah, and Sonya, I want to talk about that a little bit more, about the faithful. I mean, how are the faithful doing in Ukraine? Are they able to attend Mass or prayer services at all? How are things there?
Well, as you can take a look at the conflicts going on across the country, obviously in the countries which are under siege or which have been more forcefully invaded and which have a number of bombings, our priests are working hard to be able to support the faithful spiritually, whether it's in a bomb shelter or whether it's wherever they may be hiding to try to escape the bombings. Our priests are there with them, giving them comfort and trying to give them spiritual support. As you move more towards the center and the west of the country, and again, bombings are now across the country. Unfortunately, our people are suffering more, but where possible, services are taking place in churches. Our priests are there with our faithful. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church has always been a stalwart supporter of the Ukrainian people and for their human rights and for their right to freedom of religion. And so our priests are also serving as chaplains on the front line, putting themselves in harm's way with our soldiers, with our territorial defense units. And many of them are embedded, and they are giving spiritual support to the soldiers as well.
And Sonya, thank you so much for all that you do. Sonya Soutus, Director of the Ukrainian Catholic Crisis Media Center. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
And finally tonight, Father Jason Charron is a married Eastern Rite Ukrainian Catholic priest in Pennsylvania. He and his wife have 7 children. His experience as both a parent and a priest came in handy when a parishioner said that he wanted to travel to Ukraine amid the military conflict to try and help a group of orphans. And joining us now is Father Jason Charron, pastor of Holy Trinity Ukrainian Catholic Church in Pennsylvania and Our Lady of Perpetual Help Ukrainian Catholic Church in West Virginia. Father, great to have you on. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, can you tell us about the rescue of these 22 orphans and how you got involved, why you got involved?
Yeah, well, it was, as is so often when you give your life to God, it was sudden and unexpected, but full of mystery and thrills at the same time, some sorrow and some joy. What had happened is a parishioner of mine, Alan Sherwood, and his wife Anita Sherwood, they wanted to adopt, and we're Ukrainian Catholic, and my wife knows people back in Ukraine, and so we put them in touch with some people back in the homeland, so to speak. And they eventually brought over one of these little girls, a beautiful little girl, and had her at their house at Christmas for a home visit. and it was a hit. And she stole not only their hearts, but the hearts of everyone in my parish. You know, after about 4 or 5 weeks of the visit, at the end of it, you know, Alan said to this little beautiful little angel, he said, you know, if anything bad ever happens, if you're ever in danger, I'll come and I'll rescue you. And little did he know that in a few weeks, about 4 or 5 weeks later, Ukraine was invaded by the aggressor nation to the north, Russia. And you know, that day he just came right over to the church and said, I have to go.
So what happened? You two actually went into Ukraine to get the little girl and some other children as well?
Yeah, it wasn't so easy. It wasn't easy getting in, and it wasn't entirely easy getting out. You know, we flew from Pittsburgh to Helsinki, or through New York, I think, or something, and then to Warsaw. And then we just thought it would be, I mean, everyone in Ukraine is leaving. No one's going into Ukraine. So we just thought we'd rent a car, and we went to the airport in Warsaw, and they say, we're not allowing any of our cars to go anywhere near Ukraine. And so we have to figure out how we're going to get from Warsaw, Poland, all the way down to, you know, not only to Ukraine, but into Ukraine. And we taxied it, you know, so we took a taxi all that way. I was aware that we'd be going into Ukraine. I'd entered Ukraine many, many times in my life when I lived there. But as you get close to the border, you're walking across, and you see this sea of humanity, just as far as the eye can see, of people lining up to get out and going through customs at the Polish border. You kind of get that feeling in your stomach, like, how am I ever going to get out of here? Once I cross this border, I don't know what awaits me, you know. So we crossed that border, and that was, you know, we met some great heroes in that crossing. So we did that, and then the next thing was to, I mean, sometime I could tell you about the stories just of those people we met crossing that border. But we crossed the border, and then our next objective was to rendezvous with the orphans. So we were able to get the orphans to Lithuania, and Lithuania is you know, going to try and regularize their situation. Hopefully, you know, if this war ends tomorrow, they'll be able to go back home.
Wow, that is unbelievable. So where do things stand right now?
You know, I'll just be truthful with you, Tracy. Is, you know, our country is a light on a hill for many nations, and it offers the promise of liberty and freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. But unfortunately, when it comes to doing the heavy work of getting people into this country, you can defeat the Red Army, but you can't defeat our red tape. And there's a lot of difficulty right now for people, refugees, whether they're orphans or, you know, young families, anyone, elderly, anyone fleeing from Ukraine. To get refugee status here. Ukraine is fortunate in that it has Poland as a neighbor. Poland, Catholic Poland, people are saying that the faith is declining in Poland. It might be, but Catholic Poland is alive right now, and you can the meter of that activity and fervor is the way they treat their widows and orphans, and then we see that in the first chapter of James. That's the measure of true religion, if you take care of widows and orphans.
It is a beautiful story indeed. And I know that you're in the Pittsburgh area. You also have a parish in West Virginia. A lot of great people there. Other people watching this I know are going to want to help. How can they do that?
Make sure that you remain vigilant and that you are becoming a pillar of light and life and love in this world. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, as Hulk Hogan used to say, become the light. Stay close to Jesus and Mary. In terms of political activism, call your congressman. They find how important an issue is by the number of phone calls they receive from their constituents.
Well, Father, I wish we had more time to talk. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. But thank you so much again for speaking with us and for all that you're doing. God bless you.
Thank you. Glory to Jesus Christ.
And if you're interested in lending financial support, you can do so by sending donations to the Ukrainian Orphans Care Fund. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.